The streetlight flickered above Eleanor Grayson, casting jagged shadows on the cracked pavement where she sat. Her knees ached from the cold concrete, and the autumn wind bit through her thin shawl. At 78, she'd never imagined herself abandoned like this, left on a curb like a discarded piece of furniture. Her children Michael and Laura had driven her here, to the edge of the city. After a terse argument in the car, "You're too much trouble, Mom," Michael had said. His voice clipped. Laura hadn't even looked at her, just stared out the window as the car pulled away, leaving Eleanor with nothing but her purse and the weight of their betrayal. Eleanor's hands trembled as she clutched her shawl tighter, not from the cold, but from the sting of their words. She'd raised them, sacrificed everything: her career, her savings, her dreams to give them a life she never had. And now, at the twilight of her years, they'd discarded her. The memory of their taillights fading into the night burned in her mind. But Eleanor wasn't broken. Not yet. Beneath the hurt, a spark of defiance flickered. They thought she was helpless, a burden. They were wrong. She pushed herself up, her joints protesting, and shuffled toward a nearby diner, its neon sign buzzing faintly. Inside, the warmth enveloped her, and the smell of coffee and fried eggs grounded her racing thoughts. She slid into a booth, her hands still shaking as she pulled out her phony, a clunky old model her grandson had mocked, but which she'd learned to navigate with surprising skill. The diner's lone waitress, a tired woman with kind eyes, brought her a cup of tea without being asked. "You okay, hon?" she said, her voice soft but not pitying. Eleanor nodded, though her throat tightened. "Just need a moment," she whispered. The waitress left her alone, and Eleanor's gaze fell to her phone. She opened the banking app, the one Michael had set up for her years ago when he'd taken control of her finances. "It's easier this way," he'd said, convincing her to link her accounts to his and Laura's for family convenience. She'd trusted them. That trust was gone now. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She wasn't tech-savvy, but she wasn't ignorant either. Years of managing a household on a shoestring budget had taught her resourcefulness, and the library's free computer classes had given her just enough knowledge to be dangerous. She logged in, her heart pounding as she saw the balances: her life savings, the money from her late husband's pension, all still there, but under their control. Michael and Laura had access to every penny. They'd been siphoning small amounts for months, thinking she wouldn't notice. She had. The spark of defiance grew into a flame. They'd left her here, expecting her to crumble. But Eleanor Grayson had never crumbled. Not when her husband died. Not when she worked double shifts to keep the lights on. Not now. She tapped through the app, her hands steadier now, and found the transfer option. Her lips pressed into a thin line. If they thought they could discard her and keep her money, they were about to learn a lesson. The diner's clock ticked past midnight, and Eleanor's tea had gone cold. She'd spent hours navigating the app, double-checking every step. She wasn't stealing; this was her money, her life's work. But the act felt like a rebellion, a reclaiming of her dignity. She transferred every cent from the joint accounts to a new one she'd set up months ago, one they didn't know about. It was a secret she'd kept after noticing their withdrawals, a precaution she'd hoped she'd never need. The app confirmed the transfer with a soft ping, and a weight lifted from her chest. But the victory was bittersweet. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of her situation sank in. She had no home to return to. Michael had sold her house, claiming it was for her own good. She had no family to call, no one who cared enough to pick her up from this desolate curb. The diner's warmth couldn't shield her from the loneliness creeping in. She stared at the empty cup, her reflection distorted in the ceramic. "What now?" The waitress returned, sliding a plate of toast in front of her. "On the house," she said, her smile gentle. You look like you could use it. Eleanor's eyes welled up. Not from the food, but from the small act of kindness. She nodded her thanks, unable to speak. As she nibbled the toast, her mind churned. She couldn't stay here forever. But she wasn't helpless. She'd survived worse than this. Her phone buzzed, startling her. A notification from the bank confirmation that the transfer was complete. She exhaled, a shaky breath of relief. They wouldn't know yet. They were probably sleeping, blissfully unaware that their safety net was gone. The thought gave her a grim satisfaction. But it wasn't enough. Money couldn't erase the hurt, couldn't replace the family she'd lost. She needed a plan, a way to rebuild from the ashes of their betrayal. Eleanor opened her contacts, scrolling past Michael and Laura's names. Her finger paused on an old friend's named Clara, a woman she hadn't spoken to in years, but who had always been a rock when life got hard. Clara lived across the city, in a small apartment filled with books and memories. Eleanor hesitated, then pressed call. The line rang, and her heart raced. Would Clara even remember her? Hello. Clara's voice was groggy but warm, unchanged by the years. Eleanor's throat tightened again, but she forced the words out. Clara, it's Eleanor. I need help. There was a pause. Then Clara's voice softened. Where are you? Ellie, I'm coming to get you. Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks. But for the first time that night, they weren't from pain. She gave Clara the diner's address, her voice trembling with gratitude. As she hung up, she looked out the window at the empty street. The curb was still there, waiting. But she wasn't. Not anymore. Clara's old station wagon pulled up to the diner just as the sky began to lighten, a faint gray creeping over the horizon. Eleanor watched from the window, her hands wrapped around a fresh cup of tea the waitress had insisted on refilling. The sight of Clara, her hair now fully white, her frame stooped but sturdy, brought a rush of memories. They'd been friends since their 20s, bonded by shared struggles and late-night talks over cheap coffee. Clara had always been the one to pull Eleanor back from the edge. And now, here she was again. Clara didn't ask questions when Eleanor slid into the passenger seat, her purse clutched tightly in her lap. She just reached over, squeezed Eleanor's hand, and said, "You're staying with me. No arguments." Eleanor nodded, too exhausted to protest. The drive was quiet, the hum of the engine filling the space between them. Eleanor stared out the window, the city blurring past, and let herself feel the weight of the night. She'd taken back her money, but the ache in her chest hadn't eased. Clara's apartment was small but warm, filled with mismatched furniture and stacks of books that spilled onto every surface. It's not much, Clara said, setting a kettle on the stove. But it's home. Eleanor managed a small smile, the first in hours. She sank onto the couch, her body heavy with fatigue, and Clara handed her a mug of chamomile tea. Now, Clara said, sitting across from her, tell me everything. The story poured out Michael and Laura's growing distance, their impatience with her frailty, the way they'd taken control of her finances under the guise of care. Eleanor's voice broke as she described the curb, the cold pavement, their taillights vanishing. Clara listened, her face a mix of anger and sorrow. When Eleanor finished, Clara leaned forward, her eyes fierce. They don't deserve you, Ellie, but you're stronger than they'll ever know. Eleanor wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at her. She was old, alone, and her children had betrayed her. What strength did she have left? Clara seemed to sense her hesitation. You're not done yet, she said firmly. You've got fight in you. Always have. The next morning, Eleanor woke to the smell of pancakes and the sound of Clara humming in the kitchen. For a moment, She felt like she was back in her old life, before everything unraveled. But the reality of her situation crashed back. She had her money, but no home, no family, no clear path forward. She joined Clara at the tiny kitchen table, where a stack of pancakes waited. "Eat," Clara said. "Then we'll figure out what's next." Over breakfast, Clara suggested Eleanor stay with her permanently. "There's room," she said, waving off Eleanor's protests. "And I could use the company." But Eleanor knew she couldn't lean on Clara forever. She needed to stand on her own, to prove to herself and to her children that she wasn't the burden they'd made her out to be. Her phone buzzed, shattering the moment. It was Michael. She stared at the screen, her heart racing. Clara raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to answer," she said. But Eleanor did. She needed to know what he wanted, what he'd say now that she'd taken back what was hers. "Mom, where's the money?" Michael's voice was sharp, panicked. "The accounts are empty. What did you do?" Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. "I took what's mine," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You left me on a curb. Michael, did you think I'd just sit there and take it?" There was a long silence, then a string of excuses misunderstood. They'd been stressed. They'd planned to come back for her. Eleanor didn't believe a word. She hung up, her heart pounding, but her resolve firm. Clara gave her an approving nod. "That's my girl," she said. The rest of the day was spent planning. Eleanor and Clara sat with a notepad, mapping out her next steps. She'd need a place to live, a way to manage her money independently, and perhaps a lawyer to ensure Michael and Laura couldn't come after her. Clara suggested contacting a community center she volunteered at, one that offered resources for seniors. "They've got people who can help," she said. "Legal advice, housing options, all of it." By evening, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't just surviving, she was fighting back. The community center was a start, a place to rebuild. But as she lay in Clara's guest bed that night, her thoughts drifted to her grandchildren. They weren't to blame for their parents' actions, but they'd been kept at a distance, caught in the crossfire of Michael and Laura's selfishness. She wanted to see them, to make sure they knew she loved them. That would come later, she decided. For now, she needed to focus on herself. Clara knocked softly on the door, holding a cup of tea. "You're going to be okay, Ellie," she said. "You've got this." Eleanor nodded, her eyes stinging. "I know," she whispered. And for the first time in years, she believed it. The community center was a low brick building tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. Its sign faded but welcoming. Eleanor stepped inside, Clara at her side, and was greeted by the hum of voices and the smell of fresh coffee. The room was filled with seniors, some playing cards, others chatting over knitting or newspapers. It felt alive, a stark contrast to the sterile silence of Michael's house, where she'd spent her days feeling like an intruder. A woman named Rosa, the center's director, met them at the front desk. She was in her 50s, with warm brown eyes and a no-nonsense air. "Clara says you need help," she said, guiding them to a small office. Eleanor hesitated, then told her story, not the full version, but enough. Rosa listened, her expression shifting from concern to quiet anger. "You're not the first," she said when Eleanor finished. "Family can be crueler than strangers sometimes." Rosa laid out options: subsidized housing, legal aid, financial counseling. Eleanor's head spun, but Rosa's calm efficiency grounded her. "We'll start with the basics," Rosa said. "A place to live, and protection for your money." She handed Eleanor a stack of forms and a card for a pro bono lawyer named Daniel, who specialized in elder law. "He's good," Rosa said. "He'll make sure your kids don't come after you." Eleanor spent the day at the center, filling out forms and meeting with a counselor who helped her set up a new bank account. This one untouchable by anyone but her. The process was daunting, but each step felt like a brick in the foundation of her new life. Clara stayed close, cracking jokes to lighten the mood. And by the afternoon, Eleanor felt a sense of purpose she hadn't known in years. That evening, back at Clara's, Eleanor called Daniel. He was younger than she'd expected, with a gentle voice and a sharp mind. He listened to her story, asking pointed questions about Michael and Laura's actions. What they did could be considered elder abuse. He said, "We can file for a restraining order if you want, and we'll protect your assets. They won't touch a cent." Eleanor's stomach churned at the term elder abuse. It felt too big, too ugly for what her children had done. But as she thought about the curb, the cold, their indifference, she realized Daniel was right. She agreed to meet him the next day to start the paperwork. As she hung up, she felt a mix of relief and guilt. Taking legal action against her own children was a line she'd never thought she'd cross. But they'd crossed a line first. The next morning, Eleanor woke to another call from Laura. This time, her daughter's voice was softer, pleading, "Mom, we're sorry. We didn't mean to hurt you. Let's talk this out." Eleanor's heart wavered. She'd always been weak to Laura's apologies, even when they were hollow. But Clara, who'd overheard, shook her head. "Don't let her manipulate you," she said. "She's scared because you took control." Eleanor took a deep breath and told Laura, "We'll talk when I'm ready. Not before." She hung up before Laura could respond, her hands shaking but her resolve unbroken. Clara clapped her on the shoulder. "That's the Ellie I know," she said. The day was spent at Daniel's office, a cramped space filled with legal books and coffee mugs. He walked Eleanor through her options, explaining how to protect her money and secure her independence. He also suggested a mediator to handle any future contact with Michael and Laura, to keep things civil but firm. Eleanor listened, her mind racing but clear. She was taking back her life, piece by piece. By evening, she and Clara returned to the community center for a support group Rosa had recommended. The group was small, just a handful of seniors sharing stories of loss, betrayal, and resilience. Eleanor didn't speak, but listening to the men and women who'd faced their own versions of abandonment made her feel less alone. One woman, Margaret, shared how her son had drained her savings, leaving her to rebuild at 80. "You keep going," Margaret said, her voice steady. "You don't let them win." Eleanor took those words to heart. As she and Clara drove back to the apartment, she felt a quiet strength growing inside her. She wasn't just surviving, she was reclaiming her dignity, her worth. The curb had been a low point, but it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Eleanor's new apartment was small, a one-bedroom unit in a subsidized complex near the community center. It wasn't much bare walls, a creaky bed, a kitchenette with a single burner, but it was hers. She stood in the doorway, clutching a box of her few belongings, and felt a surge of pride. For the first time in years, she had a space that wasn't under someone else's control. Clara helped her unpack, hanging a faded photo of Eleanor's late husband on the wall. "It's a start," Clara said, smiling. "You'll make it home." The move had taken weeks to arrange. With Rosa's help at the community center, Daniel had worked quickly, securing her finances and filing for a restraining order against Michael and Laura. They hadn't contacted her since Laura's call, but Eleanor wasn't taking chances. The legal process was draining, but each step made her feel stronger, more in control. She'd also started attending the support group regularly, finding comfort in the shared stories and quiet camaraderie. Her days took on a rhythm. Mornings were spent at the community center, where she volunteered to teach basic computer skills to other seniors. She'd learned enough from her library classes to be useful, and the act of teaching gave her purpose. Afternoons were for settling into her apartment, adding small to chase a thrift store lamp, a potted plant from Clara. Evenings were for reflection, often with a cup of tea and a notebook where she jotted down her thoughts. One afternoon, as she was watering her plant, her phone buzzed. It was a text from her grandson. "Ethan, Laura's son. Grandma, can we talk? I miss you." Eleanor's heart ached. Ethan was 16, a quiet boy who'd always been close to her before Laura pulled him away. She hesitated, then replied, "I'd like that. Let me know when." She didn't want to cut him out, but she needed to be cautious. Daniel had warned her about family members acting as proxies for Michael and Laura. Ethan's response came quickly. "Can I come see you?" "Mom doesn't know." Eleanor's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, but trust was a fragile thing now. She consulted Clara, who suggested meeting at the community center, a neutral space. "Bring him into your world," Clara said. "Let him see who you are now." The meeting was set for the next day. Eleanor arrived early. Her stomach knotted with nerves. When Ethan walked in, lanky and awkward in a hoodie, her heart softened. He looked so much like Laura at that age, but his eyes held a sincerity his mother lacked. He hugged her tightly, and for a moment, Eleanor let herself forget the pain of the past months. "I didn't know what they did," Ethan said, his voice low. "Mom told me you moved away. I only found out because I overheard her and Dad arguing about money." Eleanor listened, her heart breaking for him. He wasn't to blame, but he was caught in the fallout. She told him about the curb, keeping her tone steady, and his face fell. "I'm so sorry, Grandma," he whispered. They talked for hours, sharing stories of better times. Ethan promised to keep in touch, and Eleanor believed him. As he left, he hugged her again, and she felt a spark of hope. Maybe not all was lost with her family. Maybe there was still a bridge to build. That evening, Eleanor sat in her apartment, the silence comforting rather than heavy. She opened her notebook and wrote, "I am not what they tried to make me. I am Eleanor Grayson, and I am enough." The words felt like a vow, a promise to herself. She'd been left at the curb, but she'd picked herself up, and she wasn't done yet. Months passed, and Eleanor's life took on a fullness she hadn't known in years. Her apartment was now a home, filled with small treasuries, a quilt from the community center's craft fair, a shelf of books from Clara, a drawing Ethan had made during one of his visits. He came by often, always at the community center, and their bond grew stronger with each conversation. He never mentioned his parents, and Eleanor didn't ask. She was building something new, and she didn't want their shadow over it. Her work at the community center expanded. She'd started a small group for seniors to share their stories, not just of loss, but of triumph. The group grew, drawing people from across the city. Eleanor found herself at the center of it, a quiet leader who listened more than she spoke. Rosa called her a pillar, and though Eleanor brushed off the praise, it warmed her. Daniel's legal work was nearly complete. The restraining order was in place, and her finances were secure. But one day, he called with unexpected news. Michael and Laura wanted to meet, through a mediator. "They're claiming they want to make amends," Daniel said, his tone skeptical. "It's your call, Eleanor." She spent days wrestling with the decision. Part of her wanted to shut them out forever, to let them live with the consequences of their actions. But another part of the mother who'd raised them, who still loved them despite everything, wanted to hear them out. Clara urged caution. "They don't get to hurt you again," she said. Ethan, when she asked him, was quiet but firm. "They need to earn your trust. Grandma, don't just give it back." In the end, Eleanor agreed to the meeting, but on her terms, at the community center, with Daniel and Rosa present. When the day came, she dressed carefully, choosing a simple sweater and her late husband's watch for courage. Michael and Laura arrived looking subdued, their usual confidence gone. Laura's eyes were red, and Michael couldn't meet Eleanor's gaze. The mediator, a calm woman named Susan, kept the conversation structured. Laura spoke first, her voice trembling. "We were wrong, Mom. We were overwhelmed, and we made a terrible mistake." Michael nodded, adding, "We didn't mean to hurt you. We want to fix this." Eleanor listened, her face impassive. Their words stirred memories of birthday parties she'd planned, sleepless nights when they were sick, the sacrifices she'd made. But they also stirred anger. "You left me on a curb," she said, her voice low but steady. "You took my money, my home, my trust. Words don't fix that." The room was silent. Laura started to cry, but Eleanor didn't soften. She wasn't cruel, but she was done being a doormat. "I want to believe you're sorry," she said, "but trust is earned, and you've got a long way to go." Susan suggested a plan, limited contact, supervised by the mediator, with clear boundaries. Eleanor agreed, but only for Ethan's sake. She wanted him to have a relationship with his parents, but she wouldn't let them back into her life without proof of change. As they left, Michael tried to hug her, but she stepped back. "Not yet," she said. He nodded, and for the first time, she saw something like respect in his eyes. That night, Eleanor sat with Clara, recounting the meeting. "You did good," Clara said, raising a glass of tea in a mock toast. "You stood your ground." Eleanor smiled, feeling the weight of her choices. She'd faced her children, not as a victim, but as a woman who'd reclaimed her strength. The curb was a memory now, not a definition. A year after the curb, Eleanor stood in the community center's garden, watching Ethan plant a rose bush. It was a sunny afternoon, and the air smelled of fresh earth and hope. The center had become her second home, a place where she'd found purpose and community. Her story group had grown into a citywide program, with seniors from all walks of life sharing their lives and lessons. Eleanor was no longer just a participant, she was a leader, a voice for those who'd been silenced. Ethan had become a constant in her life, visiting weekly and helping with small tasks around her apartment. He'd started calling her Grandma Ellie, a nickname that made her heart swell. Through him, she'd learned that Michael and Laura were trying to change attending counseling, respecting her boundaries. She wasn't ready to forgive them fully, but she'd agreed to occasional supervised visits, always with Ethan present. It was a fragile truce, but it was enough for now. Her apartment was now a reflection of her, colorful, cluttered with memories, alive with plants and photos. She'd framed Ethan's drawing, a sketch of her laughing in the community center's garden, and it hung above her couch. Clara visited often, their friendship stronger than ever. The two of them would sit on Eleanor's tiny balcony, sipping tea and talking about everything from books to the future. One evening, Rosa called Eleanor into her office at the center. "We're starting a new program," she said, "to advocate for seniors' rights. We want you to lead it." Eleanor was stunned. She'd never seen herself as a leader, but Rosa's faith in her was unshakable. "You've been through hell and come out stronger," Rosa said. "You can help others do the same." Eleanor accepted, her heart full. The program would focus on protecting seniors from financial abuse, neglect, and abandonment issues she knew too well. She'd work with Daniel, Rosa, and others to create resources, host workshops, and push for policy changes. It was daunting, but Eleanor was ready. She'd faced the worst and survived. She could do this. As the sun set on the garden, Ethan finished planting the rosebush and stood back, grinning. "Looks good, right, Grandma Ellie?" he said. She nodded, her eyes misty. The rosebush was a symbol of growth, of resilience, of a life reclaimed. She thought back to the curb, to the cold night that had nearly broken her. It hadn't. Instead, it had set her free. That night, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, her notebook open. She wrote, "They left me at the curb, but I didn't stay there. I built a new life, one they can't take away. And I'm not done yet." She closed the notebook, a quiet smile on her face. The world had tried to discard her, but Eleanor Grayson had refused to be forgotten. She'd taken every penny her money, her power, her dignity, and built something beautiful. And she'd keep building. For herself, for Ethan, for every person who'd ever been left behind.